The call came at 2:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was half asleep when I fumbled for my phone, seeing an unfamiliar Connecticut number on the screen. "Is this Mark Foster?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "This is Mercy Hospital in Hartford. I'm calling about your father, Richard Foster. I'm very sorry to tell you that he passed away this evening. Heart attack. It was quick. He didn't suffer." I sat up in bed, the words not quite processing. My father was dead. Richard Foster, the man who'd raised me alone after my mother died when I was 8, who'd taught me to fish and fix cars and be honest, even when it was hard. He was gone. "When did this happen?" "About 3 hours ago. We've been trying to reach his next of kin. Your stepmother, Linda Foster, was here, but she left shortly after he passed. She said she needed to make arrangements. She mentioned you might want to be notified." Mentioned, not insisted, not made sure I knew immediately. Mentioned, like an afterthought. "Thank you for calling. Can you tell me which funeral home they're using?" "I believe Mrs. Foster mentioned Riverside Memorial, but you'd need to confirm that with her." I had Linda's number saved from 6 years ago, from back when my father had first introduced us as his girlfriend, back before she became his wife and I became a stranger in his life. I called. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice crisp despite the hour. "Yes?" "Linda, it's Mark. The hospital just called. I'm so sorry about Dad. I'm going to catch the first flight out tomorrow morning. Can you tell me—" "The funeral will be Thursday at St. Andrew's Episcopal at 2 p.m. I've already made all the arrangements. I'll text you the details." "Okay, Linda, I know this is a terrible time, but I wanted to say, Mark, I have a lot to handle right now. We can talk later." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the dark of my Seattle apartment, holding my phone, feeling the familiar sting of being shut out. It had been like this for 6 years, ever since my father married Linda, and slowly, incrementally, I'd been erased from his life. It hadn't been sudden. That would have been easier to identify, easier to fight against. Instead, it was gradual. Invitations to family events would come late, or not at all. "Oh, we thought you were busy with work," Linda would say, when I'd mentioned not being invited to Thanksgiving. Phone calls with Dad became shorter, interrupted by Linda needing him for something. Visits became awkward, with Linda hovering, steering conversations away from our shared past, redirecting Dad's attention whenever we started reminiscing. "Linda just wants to feel included," Dad had said once, the only time I'd confronted him about it. "You have to understand, she feels like an outsider when we talk about your mother, about the old days. Can't you try to be more welcoming?" But I had tried. I'd asked Linda about her life, her interests, her family. She'd answered in polite monosyllables and then changed the subject. The truth, which I'd been too generous to acknowledge then, was that Linda didn't want to be included in our family. She wanted to replace it with her own version, one where I was a footnote at best. The last real conversation I'd had with my father was 3 years ago. I'd flown out for his birthday, hoping to reconnect. Linda had planned a party, her friends, her family, people Dad barely knew. I'd felt like a guest rather than a son. When I'd tried to give Dad his present, a restored tackle box from when he used to take me fishing, something I'd spent months tracking down and refurbishing, Linda had intercepted. "How thoughtful, Mark. Richard will love it. Why don't you put it with the other gifts?" She gestured to a table overflowing with expensive bottles of wine and luxury items, where my modest gift would be lost among the excess. I'd left early. Dad had called the next day, but the conversation was strained. He'd thanked me for the tackle box, said it meant a lot, promised we'd go fishing soon. We never did. After that, our communication dwindled to birthday cards and occasional texts, and now he was gone, and I hadn't been there. Hadn't known he was sick, Hadn't had a chance to say goodbye. I booked a flight for first thing in the morning and spent the rest of the night going through old photos. Dad teaching me to ride a bike, Dad at my high school graduation, Dad and me building a treehouse when I was 9. Evidence that we'd been close once, before Linda, before I'd been slowly written out of his life. The funeral was at St. Andrew's, a beautiful old church in Hartford's historic district. I arrived early, wearing the suit I'd bought for job interviews, carrying the old photo I'd found of Dad and me at my college graduation. It was my favorite picture of us, both grinning, his arm around my shoulders, so proud. The parking lot was already filling up. I didn't recognize most of the cars. Inside, the church was decorated with white flowers and photos of my father, though I noticed most were from the last 6 years. Dad and Linda traveling, Dad and Linda at parties, Dad with Linda's family. Only one photo included me, a family portrait from his 60th birthday, where I stood awkwardly at the edge of the frame. I found a seat in the 3rd row, behind where I assumed family would sit. People filed in, Linda's friends, people from the country club Dad had joined after marrying her, business associates. I recognized a few of Dad's old friends from before Linda, and they nodded at me sympathetically. Linda arrived 15 minutes before the service, wearing an elegant black dress and surrounded by her adult children from her first marriage and their families. She saw me and her expression tightened, but she didn't acknowledge me beyond a brief nod. She took her seat in the front row, her children flanking her protectively, as if I might do something to disturb her grief. The service was beautiful, but impersonal. The minister, who'd clearly not known my father well, spoke in generalities about a devoted husband and pillar of the community. Linda's son-in-law gave a eulogy about what a wonderful stepfather Richard had been to Linda's children, how he'd welcomed them into his life. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement that Richard Foster had raised a son alone for 20 years before Linda entered the picture. I sat there feeling invisible, the grief mixing with anger and something deeper, a sense of erasure, of being deleted from my own father's story. After the service, people gathered to share memories. I stood up, my heart pounding, holding my photo. I wanted to say something, to remind everyone that my father had existed before Linda, that he'd been more than her husband, that he'd been my dad. But before I could speak, Linda was at my side, her hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mark, could I speak with you outside for a moment?" It wasn't a question. She was already steering me toward a side door, away from the other mourners. We stepped into a small courtyard, and she dropped my arm, her polite mask sliding away. "What do you think you're doing? I wanted to share a memory of Dad. That's what people do at funerals. You don't belong here, Mark." The words hit me like a slap. "Excuse me? You heard me. You don't belong here. Not after disappearing from your father's life all these years. Not after the way you hurt him with your absence." "My absence?" "Linda, you pushed me out. You made it impossible for me to have a relationship with my own father. I did no such thing. You chose to stay away. You chose not to call, not to visit. Your father tried to include you, and you couldn't be bothered. And now you want to show up here and play the grieving son. It's insulting." "That's not what happened." She held up a hand. "I don't want to hear it. Today is about honoring Richard's memory. Please respect his memory and let the people who truly loved him grieve in peace. You made your choices. Now live with them." She walked back inside, leaving me standing in the courtyard, shaking with anger and grief and the impotence of not being able to defend myself without causing a scene at my own father's funeral. I took a few minutes to compose myself, then went back inside. People were starting to leave for the burial. I kept my head down, avoided eye contact, tried to become invisible. If I didn't belong at my father's funeral, I'd at least bear witness to his burial, even if I had to do it as an outsider. The burial was at Riverside Cemetery, a beautiful old graveyard with ancient trees and weathered headstones. I stood at the back of the crowd gathered around the grave, listening to final prayers, watching them lower my father into the ground next to a plot reserved for Linda, not next to my mother, who he'd been married to for 15 years. Linda had apparently decided that part of his history didn't matter. As people began to disperse, heading back to their cars or to the reception Linda had organized at the country club, a man in a navy suit approached me. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Mr. Foster? Mark Foster?" "Yes?" He extended his hand. "I'm David Morales, your father's attorney. I'm very sorry for your loss." I shook his hand, confused. "Thank you. I'm sorry. Did we have an appointment? I didn't think there was anything." "Not an appointment, no. But your father left specific instructions about his estate that need to be addressed today, immediately following the burial. If you could wait just a moment, I need to gather Mrs. Foster and the other relevant parties." Before I could ask what he meant, Morales was walking toward Linda, who was accepting condolences from a group of well-dressed mourners. I saw him speak to her quietly, saw her face tighten with annoyance, saw her glance at me with what looked like alarm. She tried to wave him off, but Morales was insistent. Finally, she nodded curtly and followed him back toward the grave, her children and their spouses trailing behind her, looking confused. Morales gathered us near the grave, me on one side, Linda and her family on the other, with a small group of confused mourners who'd remained to see what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morales said, his voice carrying over the cemetery, "thank you for staying. Mr. Richard Foster left explicit instructions in his will that certain portions be read aloud at his burial, in the presence of his immediate family and any witnesses. I know this is unusual, but these were his specific wishes." Linda's face had gone pale. "David, this isn't appropriate. We can handle estate matters privately, in your office." "I'm afraid Mr. Foster was very clear about this, Linda. He wanted this done here, today, with witnesses. If you'll allow me to proceed." He didn't wait for her permission. He opened a folder and began to read in a clear, steady voice. "I, Richard Foster, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make the following statements to be read at my burial. To my son, Mark Foster. If you're hearing this, it means I've died, and I've failed to do in life what I'm now forced to do in death. I need to apologize to you. I need you to know that I loved you every single day, and that every day I didn't call, didn't visit, didn't fight harder to maintain our relationship, those days haunt me. When I married Linda, I thought I was beginning a new chapter of my life. Instead, I allowed that chapter to erase everything that came before. I let her convince me that your calls were manipulative, that your visits were disruptions, that your very presence was a reminder of painful past that I needed to move beyond. I was weak, and I'm sorry. I want you to know this. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking about you. Every fishing trip I didn't take with you, every birthday I didn't celebrate with you, every holiday you spent alone because I was too weak to stand up for our relationship. I regretted all of it, but I was a coward, and I let my new wife's insecurities matter more than my son's place in my life. That ends now." Morales paused, looking up at the assembled group. Linda was gripping her daughter's arm, her face a mask of controlled fury. I was crying, unable to hold it back anymore. Morales continued, "To my wife, Linda, you gave me companionship in my later years, and for that I'm grateful. But you also demanded that I choose between my past and my future, and I chose wrong. I chose you over my son, and that is the greatest regret of my life. I hope you can forgive me for what I'm about to do, but I suspect you won't." To Mark, I leave the lake house at Silver Pines, the cabin we built together when you were 16, the place where we spent our happiest times. I know you thought I sold it years ago when Linda said she didn't like rustic accommodations. I didn't sell it. I kept it, maintained it, and visited it alone when I needed to remember who I was before I became someone I didn't recognize. The house is yours, free and clear. It's been kept exactly as it was. Your room still has your fishing gear, the dock still has the diving board we built, the kitchen still has your mother's recipe cards. It's been waiting for you, just like I should have been waiting for you instead of pushing you away. I also leave you half of my personal estate after taxes and specific bequests. Not because I'm trying to buy forgiveness, I know I can't, but because you're my son, and you deserve to be recognized as such. To anyone hearing this, my son Mark Foster belongs at my funeral. He belongs in my will. He belongs in my family. If anyone has told him otherwise, they were lying. And if I told him otherwise through my actions these past years, I was lying too. But I'm telling the truth now. Mark, I'm sorry I waited until I was dead to be brave. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. But I want you to know that you were always my son, always loved, always worthy. Never let anyone, including your old fool of a father, make you doubt that again. The lake house holds our memories. I hope you'll visit it, remodel it if you want, make it your own. Or burn it down in anger. I'd understand that too. Just know that it's yours because you're mine, and nothing and no one can ever change that. Morales finished reading and closed the folder. The cemetery was absolutely silent, except for the sound of birds and wind through the trees. Linda's face had gone from pale to bright red. This is a manipulation. Richard wasn't in his right mind. Mrs. Foster, Morales interrupted gently, your husband executed this will 18 months ago, when he was in perfect health and of completely sound mind. I have documentation from 2 physicians confirming his mental competency at the time of signing. He was very clear about his wishes, and he updated this will multiple times to ensure every word was exactly what he wanted to say. He turned to me. Mark, I have the keys to the lake house in my office, along with the deed and other paperwork. The estate will take some time to settle, but the house is yours immediately. Your father made sure of that. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The lake house, the place where Dad and I had spent every summer of my childhood, where he'd taught me to fish and swim and be brave. He'd kept it. All these years, he'd kept it. Linda found her voice. This is unconscionable. Richard wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have humiliated me like this in front of everyone. Linda! The voice came from one of Dad's old friends, Tom Henderson, who'd been standing quietly in the crowd. He would have done exactly this. This is Richard. Not the man you turned him into, but the real Richard, the man who loved his son more than anything. I'm glad he remembered that, even if it took dying to find the courage to say it. Several people murmured agreement. Others started drifting away, not wanting to be part of the family drama. Linda's children gathered around her, equally angry and embarrassed, shooting me looks that ranged from hostile to pitying. But I didn't care about them. I was staring at my father's grave, at the casket being lowered into the ground, finally understanding that he had loved me, that he'd known what was happening, that he'd been too weak to fix it in life, but strong enough to try to fix it in death. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I'd lost 6 years with him, years I could never get back, but it was something. It was proof that I hadn't imagined our relationship, that the man who'd raised me hadn't completely disappeared into Linda's version of him. Morales handed me his card. Call my office tomorrow. We'll go over everything. And Mark, your father talked about you often, especially near the end. He wanted you to know he was proud of you. He followed your career, knew about your promotion, was excited when you moved to Seattle. He just He couldn't figure out how to tell you while he was alive. Thank you, I managed. Thank you for making sure I knew. After Morales left and the crowd dispersed, I stood alone at the grave. Linda had gone to her reception, her family in tow. I was finally alone with my father, the way I hadn't been in 6 years. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said to the casket, but I love you. I always loved you, and I'm glad you remembered that mattered. I placed the photo I'd brought, the one of us at my college graduation, on top of his casket before it was completely lowered into the ground. Let him take that memory with him, proof that we'd been happy once, proof that our relationship had been real. 6 months later, I stood on the dock at Silver Pines watching the sun set over the lake. The house was exactly as Dad had described, my room preserved, the kitchen still holding echoes of family dinners, the porch still perfect for morning coffee. I'd taken a leave of absence from work and spent 3 months here, repairing what needed fixing, repainting, updating, making it mine while honoring what it had been. In my father's bedroom, I'd found boxes of letters he'd written to me but never sent, years of apologies and updates and love he'd been too afraid to share while Linda might see them. I read them all, cried through most of them, finally understood that my father had been trapped in a prison of his own making, too proud or too scared to admit he'd made a mistake in pushing me away, too weak to fight against the woman he'd married. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. And slowly, painfully, I was finding my way towards something that might eventually become forgiveness. At my father's funeral, my stepmother had said I didn't belong there, that I'd abandoned him, hurt him, didn't deserve to grieve. But my father's lawyer had spoken up, had read words that proved the truth. I'd belonged all along. I'd never stopped being his son. And in the end, my father had made sure everyone knew it. The lake house was my inheritance. But the real gift was knowing I'd been loved, even when it didn't feel like it, even when I'd been pushed away, even when years had passed in painful silence. My father hadn't been brave enough to fix things while he lived, but he'd been brave enough to tell the truth after he died. And somehow, standing on our dock, watching our lake, living in our house, that was enough. Not to erase the pain, but to prove that love, real love, survives even our worst mistakes, even death, even silence. And sometimes, just sometimes, it finds a way to speak.